It is to Andrew Fagan we go. Without You, My Life's Going to Be Forever Tuesday morning. You remember him as the Mockers frontman. Brilliant guy, love this guy. It's from my generation. He's from my generation. We were the guys that were getting ourselves into the Mondesir and the different pubs around town in the 80s. Dumping the school uniform, pretending we were 18 or 20, whatever it was back then. Didn't matter. He had fake IDs anyway. And then we went. So this guy's very much our our leading light, when it came to music and so forth back in the 80s. We loved him. And what you won't know, he's former Talkback host, of course, of Radio Live, and also a mad keen, I basically put the word keen there, but a mad keen sailor knows what he's doing. And he's got a 5 metre, 17.18 foot boat, which is a yacht. It's more than just a yacht though. It's a tub, and it's almost the unsinkable. Never say that in yachting. It's in the unsinkable tub, and he's been sailing for most of his life, and this was his biggest challenge that he'd bitten off. This was one to go around the 3 capes and go around the world solo, non-stop. And could he do it on a 17-foot boat? The authorities said you can't, you shouldn't go, you won't. So he said, I'll change the flag. And he got around the rules. He joins me now. Andrew, g'day, mate. Nice to have you on.
Talking about my generation. Good morning, Duncan. How are you, man?
Really good, mate. Really good. This is, I've read your book. Great book. You start off thinking, right, I'm going to go around the world solo on my 17-foot yacht. Remind people what the boat is. Describe the boat before we set off on this little journey.
Okay, so I bought it in 1985. It's technically what we call it. It's just got a mainsail, one mast and a mainsail and a head sail, and it's a keeler, so it's not a trailer sail. If it heels right over, it'll come back upright. So if it capsizes, it won't stay upside down, and it's small, 5.1 metres, 17 feet. But it's built like a little tank, like you said. It's not like a vulnerable boat with big windows, with a big cabin. It's flush decked, as we call it, very tiny watertight cockpit. And when you're inside, you can only when you're sitting there on the bunk, your head's almost touching the ceiling, so you can't stand up. So it's tiny, but I've done a lot of miles in it. I sailed it to Australia in 1994 in what they call the Solo Tasman race, which runs every 4 years from New Plymouth to Mooloolaba, just north of Brisbane. That took me 17 days in the race, and I came last, of course, because I was the smallest. And then coming back took me 18 days non-stop as well. And then in 2007, I sailed around New Zealand. I circumnavigated New Zealand, went down to the sub-Antarctic Auckland Islands, about 200 miles south of Stewart Island, and then from there back up to Auckland, non-stop up the west coast, past Fiordland and all that. That took me another 17 days non-stop. So, I've done a lot of miles in the boat. I know how to use it, and for me, it seemed a natural progression to want to. I've always wanted to sail around the world, and I thought, well, this is the boat I've got, and I've done the miles. I know how to use it. I feel safe in it when I'm out there in the big blows. So, yeah, I had to go. And
so you're getting ready for this thing, and so you're stocking up with food. Because you're going to not stop anywhere. So just remind me, this is a non-stop expedition. So you're going to have to sleep somewhere and eat somewhere. How's that going to happen?
Okay, so I loaded up with... And that was mainly freeze-dried food, backcountry cuisine. Generously gave me some at cost, and water was a big deal. You can't. Weight is a huge deal on a boat that small. You can't take your 14 months worth of water. So I had a desalinator, they call it. It's like a little sort of grease gun, which you sort of pump. And, it takes about 40 minutes to make 3 litres, so you really do appreciate the value of fresh water when you're turning the saline solution, the salt water, into fresh water, and it just drips out of this little hose pipe, and really slowly, and you really value it. But so it was. I did a lot of preparation, about 5 years preparation. I had all the spares. I was mitigating for every potential disaster, but eventually not the one that that beset us.
No, so the authorities, the Yachting Federation, whatever they are, self-important with their stripes on their shoulders and everything, are saying you can't go. Yeah, they write to you and say, you're not going anywhere, pal.
Yeah, so, I mean, in a sensible way, New Zealand Yachting Federation have this system that they call it's Cat 1. So you have to be inspected by this sailing sort of bureaucratic body in every way. They come and visit your boat, and they make sure that, you've got like 3 plastic buckets and, your life raft and absolutely everything. Meticulous inspection. And I met all those standards. I was working to get my Cat 1 certificate. And without that certificate, you can't get customs clearance to legally leave the country. So if you're a New Zealand registered vessel, so they've got you, so they've got control of you. But you also have to provide your passage plan, is what we call it. And they didn't approve of my passage plan because I thought it was too dangerous, And also, it's a strange bureaucratic body that, with these new, personal liability laws that have come in, they were telling me that they would be personally liable if something went wrong for me out there. So somehow they might have to, lose their houses and be fined, personally because of the decisions I was making, which I don't like that system at all. I don't like them impinging on my sense of freedom. It just seems to, in terms of natural justice, it just seems peculiar.
Well, you're an individual. You got your boat. You want to travel on the high seas, and the waters. The high seas are free. Your boat's bought. You're your own man. You're responsible for yourself. You don't want.
That's the way I.
You're an independent thinker. You're an independent thought. You want freedom, and you want to go.
That's the way I looked at it, Duncan. Yeah. But the only way around it, so they wouldn't give me a Cat 1 certificate. So the only way around it was to get yourself registered as a different overseas vessel, and then they have no jurisdiction over you.
Yeah.
So I got registered as a British vessel because I've got a British passport, and off I went.
Yeah. So you take off and you do. I think you did something like 40 odd days in one direction, and you don't see anything. So it must be so. I don't know. I think a lot of people would find that quite eerie and freaky and quite frightening that you are going in one direction across the Southern Ocean there, heading towards South America, and you don't see anything. Or maybe you see a container ship once, but it just seems like such a long time.
Yeah, well, it was 40 days was not as long as I wanted to be out there for, to be honest. I wanted to be out there for at least a year, in order to go around the world. But it's a mindset, Once you get out past the coast and you've left the security of the land, the proximity of land and the proximity of immediate rescue, you just have to cope and adapt to whatever the wind throws at you. And in my case, unfortunately, it was expected, but I had a series of very deep depressions. They call them, 970. Not mental depressions, weather depressions. I was happy. I was enjoying it. I was living the dream. I was doing about 90 miles a day, heading for Cape Horn. I got halfway across the South Pacific, 2,500 miles roughly. So it was going according to plan. 90 miles a day, and I was making my own water and living the dream. But the boat got beaten up, and me inside the boat got beaten up pretty bad. We had these, big, heavy weather systems that came through, and, we're talking like sort of 8 metres. Probably the worst I had was 10-metre, not wave swells, but it's the breaking crests on top of the swells that get you, And they also come
frightening. These are massive, big white water, isn't it?
Well, yeah. Well, it's not 10 metres of white water. It's just like a 10-metre swell. It's like a hill. It's like a big slope. And the key to it all is as long as those slopes are gradual and not steep, then you're okay, And so most of the time the boat was sailing really, really well. I was lying inside I've got what we call a wind vane, so the boat was steering itself, and I was inside reading my Kindle, or doing what you're doing, and the boat was doing, making really good progress. But as these low pressure systems travel around the bottom of the globe, they tend to change direction. The systems themselves just keep going from west to east. That's just the natural law of the weather. But the leading edge of the wind that accompanies them comes in normally from the northwest and gets back to the west, then southwest. So what you get is these leftover cross swells as the wind direction changes. And then those cross swells are very dangerous because they come and hit the boat side on. And so we took some massive slams. You're lying there inside, and then suddenly the whole boat's sort of tipped right over, and the cockpit is full of water. It's like when you're hand steering, sitting in the cockpit. It's like suddenly you're engulfed by this sort of white water, and you're sitting in a sparkle really up to your waist. But all the water drains out. And then you carry on, but those big hits damaged what we call the skeg, which, so underneath the boat you've got a keel, which is the important bit. You don't want that to come off. If that comes off, you're really in trouble. But then I had the skeg, which supports the rudder. And without that skeg, the self-steering wind vane wouldn't work because the boat hasn't got enough directional stability, is what they call it. So the skeg got damaged, the glue line got cracked, and it took about 3 weeks, but eventually the 3 bolts that held it on sheared off, and the skeg left the game, left my vicinity. So then the self-steering wouldn't work. So then that sort of, without that self-steering, which 70% of the time actually does all the work. Without that, I really couldn't carry on without having to hand steer for a year.
It's not going to be any good. Yeah. And so your rudder's off, your rudder's gone. You try and make.
The rudder was still there. The skeg had gone. So then I decided, okay, I was still in a positive frame of mind. I just had to modify my plan. So then I looked around for the nearest land, and at the time I was almost at what they call Point Nemo, which is the most remote place on the planet, the most furthest away from land. And the nearest land was Pitcairn Island, which was 1,000 miles north. So my plan was to sail to Pitcairn in hand steer, which was going to take about 25 days. But, I mean, that was nothing in the scheme of things for me, what I was, aspiring to do. So I started hand steering, and then the rudder snapped off because it must have been stressed out as well.
Yeah.
And then once I lost my steering, I mean, that was really it, Duncan. I was incapacitated completely and just drifting, in the middle of nowhere, yeah.
Yeah. I mean, were you starting to fear for your life and worry because how far is the rescue away? Who do you call for a rescue in sort of Point Nemo, which is no man's land?